When Mark Sullivan came home early one evening, he wasn't expecting anything unusual. But the sight that met him stopped him cold. His young wife, Emily, was sitting on the nursery floor, tears streaking down her face, her body marked with fresh bruises. Mark had always believed he had built himself the perfect life, money, success, the big house outside of Chicago, but nothing could have prepared him for this moment. Through sobs, Emily whispered, "Am I ugly? Do I look like an animal? Do I even belong with you?" Those words hit him harder than any business loss ever could. Later that night, Mark's attention drifted to the small black dome of a security camera in the corner of the ceiling. He had installed those cameras months back for safety, never thinking twice about them. But for the first time, he wondered what they might have captured while he was away. The Sullivan estate, from the outside, was everything neighbors envied: perfect lawn, tall windows reflecting the glow of the setting sun. But inside, the silence felt heavy, almost suffocating. When Mark closed the front door behind him, the sound echoed in a house that felt too still, too quiet. No laughter, no background TV, not even soft music humming from another room, just the tick of a clock somewhere in the hall. He loosened his tie the same way he always did, slow and deliberate, trying to shake off the pressure of the corporate world. A scarf, violet with tiny embroidered edges, lay tossed across a chair. When he picked it up, the faint smell of cardamom and vanilla clung to it, the scent that always reminded him of Emily. At first, he smiled, but that faded when he noticed how the fabric was twisted, like someone had gripped it too tightly. In the nursery, Emily sat beside an unfinished crib, one hand resting protectively over her pregnant belly, the other covering her face. When Mark crouched beside her, she quickly wiped her cheeks, but her makeup couldn't hide the dark bruise shadowing her jawline. She gave him the same excuse as before: she slipped, she fell, nothing worth worrying about. Her words didn't convince him, but he stayed quiet, just holding her trembling hand. Through the open window drifted faint whispers from two staff members in the garden. Their voices carried low: "Poor Mrs. Sullivan, she doesn't smile like she used to. Keep your voice down, the old lady stops by too often. People notice things." The comments stung Mark like grit in his throat. He wanted to storm outside and demand answers, but instead he stayed kneeling by Emily, helping her to the bed. She walked with small, hesitant steps, and when she finally lay down, she turned her face to the wall. Mark sat in a chair beside her, gripping the armrests until the leather creaked. As he watched her breathing settle into an uneasy rhythm, he felt something shift deep inside him. Whatever was happening under his roof wasn't going away by itself. And as the pale light of morning crept into the house, Mark realized he was about to uncover something that could destroy everything he thought he'd built. The sound of the toaster snapping felt sharper than it should have. Mark asked Emily if she had managed to get any sleep. She nodded quickly, almost too quick. He asked if she would rest after eating, and again she nodded, eyes fixed on the floor. Her answers felt rehearsed, like lines she had practiced in front of a mirror: flat voice, forced calm, expression carefully controlled. Through the open window, two landscapers strolled past, speaking in hushed tones that tried to sound casual. "Mrs. Sullivan used to laugh out here," one muttered. "It's been quiet for weeks." A beep, then a pause. Somebody should say something. Who'd even listen? The words sank into Mark's chest like stones. He rinsed out a clean coffee mug just to give his hands something to do, dried it too long, and set it back on the rack. The stillness pressed at his temples. He told Emily he had some work calls to handle. She nodded again. The nods were starting to feel like barriers being built between them. In his study, Mark shut the door with a soft click and stood with both hands planted on the leather desk blotter. In the corner, the security monitor waited, black, silent, unblinking. He typed in the code, paused to steady himself, then hit play. The footage rolled back to the day before, split across tiled windows: the foyer, the staircase, the kitchen, the nursery hall. At first, it was nothing unusual: a housekeeper carrying laundry, a package dropped off at the gate, sunlight crawling across polished floors. He fast-forwarded, watching shadows stretch across the marble like tides. At 3:12 p.m., movement at the kitchen door caught his eye. He leaned closer. His mother, Margaret, stepped inside, pearl earrings, perfect posture, every move precise. She never glanced toward the camera. People who think they own a place forget that walls can watch back. Mark scrolled forward. The first minute showed cool smiles, polite words he couldn't hear. The second minute tightened, the angle of Margaret's chin dipped, Emily's shoulders crept upward. By the third, the mask was gone. Margaret closed the space, fingers stabbing the air like a weapon. There was no sound, but the shape of her mouth was easy to read. "You don't belong here." Emily didn't reply. She pressed her palm against her stomach like someone steadying a glass on a shaky train. Then Margaret's hand lashed out, quick and practiced, gripping Emily's arm and shoving her back against the counter. Emily winced, catching herself on the edge. Mark's jaw locked so hard his teeth hurt. He rewound, replayed slower. His stomach twisted even though his body didn't move. The footage showed Margaret again, standing in the nursery doorway, arms folded, glaring at the crib as if it had committed a crime. Another clip, Margaret blocking Emily's path with a chair, lips forming words that looked like a sentence handed down by a judge. And then, a slap. Quick, flat, without hesitation. Emily steadied herself on the counter, blinking fast, swallowing back whatever sound tried to break through. Outside the study, two housekeepers passed in the hallway. Their steps slowed near the door, and he caught fragments of worried voices. "She's covering her cheek again. I saw the bruise. I wish he'd notice. He's always buried in work. Maybe today." Mark sank into his chair, the leather groaning under his weight. He stared at the paused frame, Margaret's hand mid-air, Emily braced against the counter. Heat flushed up his neck, then cooled into something heavier, sharper. He couldn't just storm in, anger would only feed Margaret's theatrics. She'd twist the room into her stage, complete with tears and outrage. If he wanted the truth to stand, he had to be patient. No rushing, no yelling, just a plan that Margaret couldn't wriggle out of. He scrolled further into the recordings. Another visit, another escalation. A pattern forming like poison spreading under wallpaper. He pinched the bridge of his nose, eyes shut, breathing slow, like a pilot steadying a plane through rough skies. When he opened them, his mind was already building the plan. He would set the stage, frame the angles, make sure the audio was live and every camera rolling. No rumors. No family drama. No misunderstandings. This time, the truth would be undeniable. The hallway grew still again. Somewhere nearby, a cabinet door shut with such careful quiet it was almost like someone didn't want to be heard. Mark stood, adjusting a photo frame that had tilted on the credenza. It showed his parents at a ribbon cutting, all polished smiles, and for a moment his own reflection overlapped theirs in the glass. His throat tightened. He straightened the picture, pressing his hand flat against the wood as if to steady himself. The plan that formed wasn't born from anger, but from patience. A quiet exit. A car waiting just down the block. Eyes glued to the cameras, phone ready, timing precise. It wasn't about revenge. It was about proof. Proof for Emily, proof for their unborn child, proof to finally clear the air inside the house. He powered down the monitor, the image shrinking into a pinprick of light before vanishing. The room felt colder. Mark lingered a moment, hands loose at his sides, before stepping into the hall with a face calm enough to hide the storm building inside him. He carried the weight of a decision he wouldn't set down. The next morning, before sunrise, Mark lay still long enough to hear Emily's breathing beside him, shallow, fragile, broken by tremors in her sleep. He slipped from bed quietly, straightened his cuff, more like a man heading into battle than a husband preparing for breakfast. By 8, he kissed her forehead, told her he had meetings downtown, and left through the front door with deliberate noise. The staff noted his departure. Tires crunched down the drive. But he didn't go far, just circled the block and parked beneath an old oak, branches stretching low across the roof of his car. His tablet lit up, cameras feeding him a dozen sharp windows into his own home. He leaned forward, jaw tight, waiting. Minutes dragged. Gardeners clipped hedges, a maid carried fresh linens. Everything looked too normal. Until a silver sedan rolled into the driveway. His mother's car. Margaret stepped out polished as ever, pearls at her neck, hair perfectly set. She didn't bother to knock. She used her key. Inside, her heels tapped across the marble like rehearsed lines in a play. The cameras caught it all. Emily stood in the kitchen, pouring tea, her shoulders already pulled tight. Margaret's figure entered, stretching a shadow across the tiles. Mark muted the sound so his own heartbeat wouldn't drown it out. He watched her lips shape words sharp enough to cut. He saw the shove, the teacup shatter, porcelain scattering across the floor. Emily bent to clean the mess, but Margaret yanked her up, fingers digging into her arm. Mark's breath burned in his chest as he pressed the tablet closer. He wanted to run in right then, but he forced himself still. The evidence had to be undeniable. Then Margaret's hand slid toward the knife block. Her fingers curled around the handle of a blade, lifting it slowly, deliberately, her expression twisted with venom. That was it. Mark's car door slammed, his footsteps pounded up the drive. He burst through the side entrance, voice cracking the stillness like a thunderclap. Enough. Both women froze. Emily staggered back, clutching her belly, tears breaking free. Margaret turned, knife hovering midair, her eyes wide, not with guilt, but with the shock of being caught. Mark moved forward one step at a time, his voice low and steady. He listed every bruise, every threat, every moment, pointing to the tiny blinking light in the ceiling. The cameras had captured it all. Margaret's hand trembled, and the knife clattered onto the counter, ringing against the marble before rolling still. Her polished mask cracked, fury collapsing into fear. Mark wrapped his arm around Emily, pulling her trembling body against his chest. He stared at the woman who had raised him, the mother he thought he knew, and the silence between them grew louder than any shouting. Then, faint but growing, came the sound of sirens. The wail of blue and red lights washed against the windows. Tires scraped the gravel outside, doors slammed, and the fragile calm of the estate shattered under the weight of authority. 2 officers entered the foyer, their clipped voices carrying the finality of law. Mark guided Emily to a chair near the wall. She buried her face against him, her breath sharp and uneven. He stroked her hair slowly, whispering promises he had never dared to say out loud until that moment. Margaret stood stiff at the counter, her pearl necklace slightly crooked, her face pale though she tried to keep the proud posture of a matriarch. She opened her mouth, but no words came. The knife was already sealed away inside a plastic evidence bag, its glint dulled under the light. Mark handed his tablet to the officers. They watched quietly as the footage rolled, every shove, every slap, every word that had scarred Emily's spirit. When the video ended, there was no hesitation. The officers turned, calm but firm, and snapped handcuffs around Margaret's wrists. The metallic click echoed through the marble halls like a final judgment. Outside the gates, neighbors gathered, their whispers curling into the night air. "So it's true," one woman muttered. "Those bruises weren't accidents," another said, shaking her head. "Money can't cover everything, not this." Mark didn't glance at them. His focus stayed on Emily, her trembling hand clutching his sleeve. He dropped to his knees in front of her, eyes locked on hers. "You're safe now," he promised, his voice breaking not from weakness, but from the weight of what those words meant. Margaret was led past the cameras she had always ignored, her empire shrinking with every step. The flashes of light caught her face pale and drawn, a portrait of a legacy collapsing. Weeks later, her name was buried in court filings and medical reports. Headlines faded, and Mark never visited her. Some ties were never meant to be repaired. Inside the Sullivan estate, the air felt new, lighter than it had in years. The nursery walls had been painted soft and warm, sunlight spilling across a freshly built crib. In that room, Mark and Emily sat together, breathing steady, whole again. For Mark, wealth no longer lived in stock numbers or polished boardrooms. It lived in the curve of Emily's smile as it slowly returned, in the gentle kicks of life stirring under her hand. Love stronger than legacy. Love chosen day after day. Because sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is stand against his own blood to protect the family he's building, the one that truly matters. And that's the reminder this story leaves behind. The toughest battles aren't always fought on city streets or across business tables. Sometimes they unfold right inside our own homes. If you were moved by Mark's choice to stand by love over legacy, make sure you hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss more stories like this. And if this touched you, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts.